And the main point here is that ESG, or environmental, social and governance risk, is a very legitimate measurement and framework for financial institutions to measure long-term risk, including the risk of climate change, and that is something that we have been supporting as a government. Ultimately, though, the judgment that banks and financial institutions make on lending is a matter for those institutions.
Yeah, but if they're weighing up the risks of lending to fossil fuels, why step in?
Well, they need to make their own risk analysis, and they need to make a judgment about whether or not it's a good judgment for them to be lending to a project or lending to an organisation which is engaged in an activity which might be a fossil fuel-based activity, and whether or not that's going to be a good economic judgment for them over the long term, because environmental risk is no different from any other sort of risk. It's an economic risk.
But why step in with an inquiry?
Well, the role of APRA is to be focused on the risk profile and the governance of the financial institutions, and that is their principal role, and that is what I imagine we will continue to maintain as our position.
Yeah. But do you accept that that climate change is becoming more and more important to the credit quality of businesses?
I do, and I think the judgments that the institutions make when they factor in environmental risk is a very sound judgment to make. And I would encourage all the financial institutions in Australia to consider carefully their environmental risk profile.
Okay, our budget bottom line, it's looking like it's going to be in better shape, Senator, by the end of this week when the mid-year economic update comes through, when MyEFA comes through. It's largely thanks to iron ore. So there's some positive news there, but we are still at record highs. Well,
the JobKeeper scheme costs $100 billion, and that was money that we felt it was necessary to spend to keep the economy together. And I think the results already are showing that our economy has held up better than almost any other during this pandemic. And so we opened the nation's chequebook to get us through this crisis. And obviously now debt is reasonably cheap, but we need to have a plan to pay it back and a plan to get back into the black.
Are you concerned? Well, that's going to take a while. But are you concerned that China might be eyeing off iron ore next? It might be next on its hit list.
Well, I found it very difficult to make foreign policy from the backbench, Pete. But what I would say is
your idea. Give us your thoughts.
Yeah. Well, look, my thoughts are if China wants to be in the World Trade Organization, and if China wants to be engaging with countries like Australia and have bilateral trade agreements like we have, the CHAFTA, then they need to stick to their commitments. You can't have it both ways. If you want to be in the international trading system, then you have to be compliant with the arrangements. Yeah.
You did mention there that borrowing's cheap at the moment. There's going to be an announcement later on about aged care. And so there's another $1 billion coming for the aged care sector, primarily for home care packages. What do you think of that? And perhaps should we be spending more on that?
We're very keen to see people stay in their own homes wherever they can. And then where they go into an institution like a aged care facility, it's also important that there are high standards. During the pandemic, that's been tested, and it was tested in particular in the state of Victoria, where they had the hotel quarantine breach and the virus escaped. But there is a Royal Commission into aged care, which is reporting in February, and we'll see some more policy advice to government then.
How much support, just moving on to you want to get some details involving the ABC's agreement with the New Daily. How much support are you getting with that?
Well, there's now APRA, the prudential regulator, is investigating whether or not the New Daily investment from the super funds was appropriate. My view is that it was probably a breach of the fiduciary duty that applies to super funds. And then more broadly, I'm pursuing the details of the commercial agreement between the ABC and the super funds through the Senate estimates process. Yeah. And I've written to David Anderson to try and get that information. I'm worried about the perception of bias. I don't think the ABC should be in business with lobbyists. and I'm worried that might affect their coverage on things like superannuation.
They say $50,000, apparently, is what the figure is.
Yeah, I'm not sure they've actually put a number out there. I mean, David Anderson promised at Senate estimates that he would provide revenue, and they haven't provided any detail of revenue. So, effectively, the Senate's now passed a motion which has called on Mr Anderson to release this information. So, I'll be pursuing that.
Just finally, I saw you're launching the campaign in the federal seat of Warringah yesterday. You want the Libs back in there. What are the chances of Tony Abbott coming back? Have you tried to persuade him?
Well, the judgment for the candidate in Warringah will be one that the Liberal Party members will make there, and I won't make any further comment on that other than to say that it needs to be someone that has economic credibility and has environmental credibility.